Today, we're going to talk about the premium Tier 6 French battleship Dakir, one of the collaboration ships for the Star Trek event. This thing is apparently a Vulcan design. It's a battleship flying under the French flag for some reason, even though it is more or less a copy paste of the Gneisenau. I suppose that's not entirely accurate. There are some major and minor differences between the Dakir and Gneisenau, but this was certainly inspired by the Gneisenau's design. Only a healthy dose of Vulcan logic has been applied to it. We'll get into what I mean in a little bit. As usual, I want to run down the stats of the ship. They're going to be influenced by my commander build, and I've got Spock at the helm of this Vulcan vessel, since obviously Spock was designed to be the commander of this ship. He's got a few skills that improve the efficacy of the secondaries, and the secondaries do indeed come into play rather, on the Dakir. Anyway, let's begin by running down the stats. This thing has 54,000 HP, which isn't a lot, to be fair, but it does have a decent armor scheme, much like the Gneisenau. It's got an icebreaker, of course, on the bow with 70 millimeter plating, although it does have a 25 millimeter upper part on the nose, which can be overmatched by a lot of things, but that icebreaker should prevent it from being citadeled through the bow. And then, of course, the deck armor and the upper belt armor are 45 or 50 millimeter plating. It's got a strong belt of 350, and, of course, the turtleback armor scheme trademarked to the Germans. The citadel, for what it's worth, also appears to be slightly underwater, so it may be difficult to hit, and it has not a full icebreaker around the stern, but it does have plating that goes maybe 2/3 of the way back on the stern to give it a little bit more protection when it's kiting away. So, pretty good armor scheme for a Tier 6 battleship, just like the Gneisenau. The torpedo damage reduction is not great at 22%. You certainly don't want to be hit by any of those. And then that'll bring us to the main battery guns as we fire at this Indianapolis across the map. Now, these main battery guns do leave a little bit to be desired. They are going to hit the Indianapolis for a nice citadel there and a respectable amount of damage, but they are not in any way consistent. And to be fair, I have not built them for accuracy. I'm using Spock as the commander after all, and he's more like a brawling battleship commander, meant to buff other aspects of the ship. You could probably build into accuracy on this thing. I'm sure some people will, but I'd rather build with the brawling type commander to improve the secondaries and things of that nature, because I think you do want to take this thing into close range. It does, after all, have torpedoes. But as for the gun stats, there are 6 of them. They are set in 3 double turrets, 2 on the front of the ship, 1 on the rear. They are 380 millimeter or 15-inch guns. They've got a firing range with this build of 17.1 kilometers, a reload time of 27 seconds, a 180-degree turret traverse time of 30, and then the AP shells do a maximum of 11,000 damage, which is a little bit on the low end. I think maybe a little bit lower than what Gneisenau does. I want to say Gneisenau does something like 11.2k, so there is that. The HE shells do a maximum of 4,200, and they've got a 32% fire chance, but frankly, I don't know why you would ever be firing HE in this thing. Like the Gneisenau, though, it does also have torpedoes, except we've got some improved torpedoes here, in the sense that these have a 7.5 kilometer range rather than a 6 kilometer range. They go in the water at a top speed of 67 knots. They reload in a very fast 60 seconds as well. That quick reload time, you might not think it's too valuable on a battleship, but let's say you miss a rack of torpedoes and you need another one available very soon. Well, 60 seconds is pretty much lightning speed in this game when it comes to torpedo reload time. There's not too many things, even destroyers that are torpedo focused, that reload their torpedo tubes quite this fast. The torpedoes themselves don't have a super high alpha strike. They've They do 13,700 maximum damage, which is a little bit on the low end. And they have a 1.3 kilometer detectability by sea for whatever that's worth. We should also talk about the secondaries, though. I don't think we've really gotten to see too much out of them, 33 hits so far, but the Dakir has something over the Gneisenau in the sense that it has longer base secondary range, which means you can more comfortably build into them. For the inspirations on Spock as the commander, I do have Kondo for extra concealment because I do indeed enjoy using that on pretty much every battleship build, including secondary focus battleships. But of course, the second inspiration is Hipper, and I'm running the secondary mod as well, and the Porcupine skill for that matter. So between those three things, the secondary mod, the Porcupine skill, and a rank 16 Hipper as an inspiration, these secondaries have a range of 8.3 kilometers. There are 22 of them. They're 128 millimeters in caliber. They reload in 2.9 seconds, which is pretty quick. HE shell damage does a maximum of 1,500 with a 7% fire chance. I think that's actually pretty good numbers for smaller caliber secondary guns that reload this quickly. And of course, if you use the secondary consumable to improve the accuracy and things like that, these things do seem to be pretty effective. I believe they have the German penetration characteristics where you take the HE in caliber and divide by 4 rather than 6 to get the value that the armor pens. I've noticed that they pen a lot of things. They don't do a huge amount of damage, of course, being secondaries, but they do light fires, and they do deal damage through HE pen, which is nice. The AA on this ship is pretty much next to useless. I don't think it can really defend itself against carriers. But the maneuverability here is certainly a highlight. It's got a 32-knot top speed, which is very fast by Tier 6 battleship standards, an 830-meter turning circle, which honestly is fairly small for a battleship as well, and then a 14-second rudder shift time. So the thing is both fast and fairly agile. Again, though, you don't want to be taking torpedoes. We see that there as the Scharnhorst hits us with his torpedoes. But you can also see the secondaries firing, lighting fires, dealing pen damage. We're obviously going to go down in this game. Unfortunately, we don't take the Aoba with us, but this match is more or less over. As soon as this Scharnhorst goes down, they're going to lose, and we'll move on to our next game. As for the concealment on this thing, well, with my build, it's extremely good at 11.8 kilometers by sea. And I think we saw the efficacy of that earlier on in this battle, which we end with 128,000 damage done, high caliber Confederate, first blood, and over 2,000 XP. So on to the next game for Haven. And we'll talk a little bit about how this ship plays, but it should be obvious to you by now. This is a high-speed flanking brawler battleship, much like the Gneisenau itself. Only I'd say it's better than the Gneisenau for a number of reasons. Number one, it is a premium, so unfortunately you would have to spend some money to get it. But if you're in the market for a Tier 6 premium battleship, this probably isn't that bad of a choice. I'm not going to tell you it's the most effective battleship known to man, or even the most effective battleship at Tier 6. It's certainly not. If you want a really good overall Tier 6 battleship, I would recommend HMS Nelson, one of my very favorites. It still, to this day, is quite a powerful Tier 6 battleship, perhaps the best premium Tier 6 battleship in the game, although that might be arguable. I don't think this Dakir comes anywhere close to that, but it is a fun ship to play, and it has things that the Gneisenau lacks that make it a little bit better. In fact, we're going to see an example of Dakir versus Gneisenau, and this should prove conclusively which ship is better. This one single data point here where we're going to come out on top versus this Gneisenau. Take a look at these torpedoes headed his way. He's well within the torpedo range. He is, of course, pretty fast, and he's maneuvering, so we're not going to hit him with all of the torpedoes, but we will tag him with at least one on the stern of his ship, which will go a long way towards sending him back to port. There's his torpedoes in the water, but of course he is the OG Gneisenau. and he only has a 6-kilometer torpedo range, meaning that they're not going to come close to us. We are well outside of that torpedo range, and because we have that extra kilometer and a half, well, we were able to hit him. That's something the Gneisenau simply cannot do. Also, you might have noticed, because the consumable is active right now, the Dakir has sonar, something the Gneisenau lacks, and an exceptionally useful tool if you want to be an aggressive, brawling battleship. You really do want sonar, because of course it gives you advanced warning of torpedoes, and this particular sonar I think has a little bit more range on torpedo acquisition than is typical. This sonar, which you get 2 charges of base, detects torpedoes at a 3.8 kilometer range, and it's got the sort of German characteristic of having a 5.4 kilometer detectability for ships. I've used it a couple times to reveal some rather sneaky destroyers, which then suffered under the hail of secondary fire. Main battery guns weren't necessarily great at dealing with the destroyers, and in fact, if you do want to see how unreliable these main battery guns can be sometimes, well, just take a look at that shot against the Aoba against the island there. Not a single shell manages to hit, and that is the story sometimes when it comes to German battleship guns generally, and the Gneisenau type guns especially. This is a Gneisenau, at least in that sense. But the sonar, which lasts for 116 seconds and reloads in 180 seconds, certainly provides you some utility that the Gneisenau simply doesn't have, and does make it easier to push in while avoiding torpedoes. So in that way, you can be more effective than the Gneisenau, because you've got the secondaries with longer range that actually deal damage and light fire. You've got longer range torpedoes than the Gneisenau, which gives you a little bit more leeway in launching them. You, of course, have very good armor that will protect you while you're brawling, and then you've got sonar for warning of torpedoes. Honestly, aside from the main battery guns, which, to be fair, are not very good, and part of that might be because I'm using running with scissors on Spock, as you can see here, this legendary skill on the commander does give you, I think, a 3% nerf to main gun battery dispersion, so it does make the accuracy a little bit worse. But I don't see why you would want to build this thing as an accuracy type battleship with, say, Hipper at the helm. I think you want to build into the secondaries and the brawling aspects of this ship, because as you might have been able to tell from these 2 matches here, I had quite a bit of fun pushing in with this thing. I mean, look at this game. We're approaching 100,000 damage done. We've sunk 3 ships. I think we did pretty similarly in the last match, and pretty much every match I played in this thing has been more or less like this. I have gone down quite a few times, being maybe overly aggressive in this thing, but is that really a vice when you're this far ahead on points and kills? I don't think so. This is just having good old-fashioned fun in World of Warships Legends. Of course, the enemy Dakir there does snag us with one of his own torpedoes, and we are on our way back to port, just trying to deal as much damage as we possibly can. We get a good hit on the Tennessee, who probably was not expecting those torpedoes, and he ultimately takes us out, but it's just him and the enemy Dakir left, so of course our team is going to be able to wrap this up nicely. The enemy Dakir himself ends up taking a wall of torpedoes from a Fubuki or something there. Very painful way to go down, but that spells our victory for this game. And as for this ship, well, I would certainly recommend it if you are in the market for a fun Tier 6 premium battleship. Again, I don't think this thing is the most effective battleship in the world. Not with 6 guns that have questionable accuracy at best, but with everything else it's got, it can certainly be fun to play. So I would recommend this one if you're willing to spend money on the game, although I don't blame you if you're not. In any case, hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.